Hi, I'm staff archaeologist Andy Shackelford with Jamestown Rediscovery, and as you can see, I am currently working from home. So what I've been doing has been taking all of our notes from the Memorial Church and putting them into our database. For this segment of Dig Deeper, I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about data collection in general. So what kind of information we're actually collecting while we're out in the field, and what happens to that information as we're putting it into the database. So here we have an example of one of our forms that we use out in the field to take notes. And before we even start digging, we're going to assign the test unit or the feature, in this case a feature, a number that is specific to it. So in this case we have 4241. And then some of the information we're going to include is the location. On here we kind of go from general to specific. So we start out with the site, then we have the master context, and then we can have a more specific description of the location in the notes section. We're also going to have a context description right here, a brief little summary of what exactly this is. So in this case, we have a mortar bed. This could also be like a 10 by 10 test unit, or a post hole, post mold, cellar, grave, planting furrow, all sorts of stuff. Then we have how this feature relates to the features around it. And so that's what this seals and sealed by part is here. Sealed by means that this context is located on top of this bed of mortar. So this context is newer than this one. And then seals means that this mortar is located on top of these contexts. And then as excavations continue, we're constantly referring back to the notes, adding and changing descriptions as the puzzle pieces begin fitting together. And then by the end of the excavations, we're able to include information on how the excavations were conducted. So, what tools were used, if it was fill, what size screen was used, whether we used a 1/4 inch or an 1/8 inch. In this case, this was a mortar sample, so we have that it was sampled in a 6x6 bag, so we know it's in the lab. And then we also make sure to record who the excavators are, so that way if we have questions about what's going on, we know who to go to ask about it. And then also, of course, the dates that everything is completed. And then anything more specific, if it doesn't fit into one of the categories we have, we will throw into the notes. As we excavate, we're also constantly mapping out what we find with the total station. Each point we take gives us 3D coordinates, a northing, an easting, and an elevation. Every feature we find is mapped, sometimes multiple times since the shape can change the more fill you remove. We also take center coordinates of each unit and feature, as well as the bottom elevations for every layer. These points we shoot in are then exported to GIS, where we can work on maps for the site which serve as both a permanent digital record for what we've already dug, as well as guides to help us figure out where we may dig in the future. So here you can see a GIS map put together by Bob Chartrand using the data that we collected in the field with the transit system. And so wherever you see yellow on the map, those were features that we found while excavating and mapped out with the transit system. And you can see we've got a whole bunch of graves, we've got some planting furrows, modern fence posts, pit features, all sorts of stuff in that area. So not all of our mapping is done with the transit system, some of it we still do on pen and paper. While we do map elevations with the transit system, there can be a whole lot of variation in between the points we map, and so that's why we take soil profiles, so we can catch all of those variances in between our mapped points. So essentially what we're doing is just looking at the soil strata that we've been digging through and recording the elevations of each strata. We begin by setting up a line level, and then we start to plot the division breaks in between each level, measuring both the distance from the edge of the profile, the X, as well as the depth below the line, the Y. And since the depth of each profile drawn specific to how the line level is set up, we're also going to shoot in at least 2 points with the transit system as well as plot them on the profile. So that way, the points recorded from the line level can be converted onto our coordinate system. So for example, this point here, the very bottom of A, it's about 2 inches below this point here that was shot in with the transit system. So the elevation here is going to be 14.248. And then we also, of course, have a key for what each layer is. So we know exactly what we were digging through, where, and what each layer consisted of.
I should also mention that all of the notes we handwrite, whether it's field notes, profiles, quick sketches, anything, it all ends up getting digitized. In the event that something happens to the original copies, we then have scanned versions that act as a backup so that we don't lose information. And in the case of working from home, like now, all of the notes can still be accessed. And in this way, multiple people can access the notes at the same time, as opposed to just a single hard copy being passed around. Again, since we can only take a feature once, we want to be taking photos of absolutely everything. Record shots are an incredibly important part of the process and help us record every layer of each unit and feature as it's being dug. We're also sure to photograph our profiles, as well as some artifacts before they're removed from the ground. To get these pictures, we have to clean the features with our trowels. So we scrape off a thin layer of dirt so that the edges are defined and the textures are consistent, erasing any footprints or marks that may have appeared during excavations. Since we want our pictures to be as accurate as possible, we're also going to spray down the entire feature and its surrounding area in water to get the colors of the soil to pop, as well as to keep them consistent. Sunlight can also be a major problem while taking photos, so we'll sometimes have to get a little creative in finding ways to shade the unit for color consistency. But all of that hard work allows our site photographer to get shots like these. So now that we've collected all of that data, I can actually go through and put the information in the notes into the database. And I'm not actually going to show you that process because, trust me, it's not the most exciting thing on the planet. But essentially what I'm doing is just double checking all of our notes. Because as time goes on, you're going to learn more and more about what you're digging. So some of the early notes may not match up to some of the later notes. So I'm going back through and just making sure that everything is consistent with our current interpretation. Especially in Memorial Church, there are so many different types of mortar and brick associated with at least 3 churches. So now that we're actually being able to sit down and do some mortar analyses, we're figuring out which parts go to which church. And so I'm making sure that that's included in the notes as they go into the database. Alright, so I gotta get back to work, but I hope y'all are staying safe, and you should definitely go check out the rest of our videos in our Dig Deeper series.